Welcome to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast, your weekly news roundup of hunting, fishing, trapping, and conservation stories from around the Gem State. Hosted by Fish and Game's Public Information Specialist, Connor J. Lease.
And welcome back to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin podcast. This week, we're talking about a fisher reintroduction project in the Panhandle, why this time of year is the best time of year to go after fat bass, and a look at how ground-based cameras show promise for measuring mule deer fawn ratios in certain parts of Idaho. But first, if you love ospreys, the Salmon River Mountains, and mindlessly watching YouTube videos at work, well, our folks up in the Salmon region have just the thing for you. Launched literally just days ago, our newest live webcam gives you a bird's eye look at ospreys as they go about their day. We've all come across various live wildlife cams before on YouTube. Some, like the Big Bear Lake bald eagles, Jackie and Shadow, are celebrities in their own right. Just ask the third graders in my mom's classroom. Now, thanks to several partners and Fish and Game staff, you can tune in, watch some ospreys, and feel right at home with the Salmon River Mountains as your backdrop. The camera was installed over a platform nest at the Salmon Outdoor Classroom, which is a public space curated by Fish and Game for the community to enjoy nature, wildlife viewing, and outdoor education. The high-resolution live stream camera will allow you to view the breeding behavior, chick rearing, and other activities by one of salmon's most recognizable birds of prey. Osprey live and breed in the Salmon River Valley from April through August, annually before they migrate to South America for the winter. Now, this project could not have been done without the generous donations of time, expertise, and funding from the Idaho Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Salmon Valley Stewardship, Idaho Power, Custer Tel, Steam World, and K12.Tech. So hit the link down in the episode's show notes or go to our YouTube channel and see what the two osprey are up to. For all other news and updates, be sure to check out Fish and Game's Salmon Outdoor Classroom Osprey Cam webpage. But peeping in on the affairs of ospreys wasn't the only cool wildlife project to hit the news last week. Meanwhile, Fish and Game staff, in partnership with a whole list of groups, have successfully wrapped up its first year bringing one fuzzy little critter back to the tall trees of North Idaho. Idaho Fish and Game, in cooperation with the Coeur d'Alene Tribe, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the Idaho Trappers Association, completed the first year of a project to move fishers, which is a member of the weasel family related to wolverine and marten, up from the Clearwater region to the Panhandle region. The Coeur d'Alene Mountains and the Panhandle contain good fisher habitat, but the area currently only supports a very small and isolated number of animals. Fish and Game initiated the project to increase the local fisher population and improve connectivity between fisher populations in the Cabinet Mountains to the north and the St. Joe Clearwater Nez Perce fisher population down in the south. The project will also gather information on movements and sites used for resting and denning. This information will be used to develop forest management strategies to benefit fishers and other wildlife. Fishers rely on mature forested habitats, requiring large trees and snags for resting and denning. Trappers with the Idaho Trappers Association began live trapping for fisher in early November and continued through mid-December. Participating trappers were reimbursed through an Idaho Fish and Game Commission Community Challenge grant. In addition, trappers were also reimbursed by the Upper Snake River Trappers, National Trappers Foundation, and Montana Trappers Association. All captured fishers were taken to a temporary holding facility where they were housed, fed, and monitored to minimize stress. Before being released, animals were anesthetized, processed for biological samples, and then fitted with these little satellite GPS collars to track their movements and habitat use. In total, 11 fishers were released into Unit 4 of the Coeur d'Alene Mountains, including 7 males and 4 females. Fish and Game, along with its partners, plans to continue the project for 1 or 2 more years with the goal of moving up to 30 fishers. The project aims to ensure healthy fisher populations for future generations. Hey, while you got your YouTube tab open from the last story, make sure to pull up the video from this project. It's called Fisher Conservation under our YouTube channel, or you can hit the link down in the episode's show notes. You gotta see it. It's really cool. You don't get to see these little guys very often, and the footage collected during this project is pretty rad. So go check it out. Well, by now we've covered fishers and fish-eating birds, but what about actual fishing? Well, lucky for you, right now is arguably the best time of year to break out the jigs and go after the state's biggest bass.
I got it already, Squidward. Bubble bass.
During spring, the local weatherman stands before a green screen strategically circling portions of the state with high and low pressure systems. Predicting spring weather in Idaho can kind of be all over the map, literally. While it may be weeks before most anglers wait for those warm, sunny days to pack coolers and slather on sunscreen, there is a group of diehards who anxiously await these unpredictable days this April. We're looking at you, hardcore bass anglers. The reason anglers go after bass during these next few weeks is simple. That's when the big trophy-sized bass are swimming up from the deeper pools to spawn in shallower water. Warmer temperatures mean more active bass. Imagine just how fun waking up at 4 a.m. to go out on a jog in January sounds. You get the point. While both largemouth and smallmouth bass can be targeted most of the year, the first few weeks of spring, as water temperatures begin to rise, mark the most exciting time to target trophy bass. And no, you don't need to be a bass tournament pro to get in on the hunt either. All it takes is a little understanding of a bass's habitat, their spawning cycle, water temperature dynamics, and directions to a nearby fishery, all of which I'll cover in this story. Put it all together, and you got a recipe for one heck of a weekend fishing for America's most popular game fish. But bass can be tricky. While found across most of the state, the opportunity to track them down during this pivotal season is often easier in theory than in reality. Understanding their habitat and the type of water body they inhabit is key to homing in on either small or largemouth bass. Smallmouths tend to lurk in cooler waters such as the Snake River and cooler lakes with deeper water and less vegetation. Largemouth, on the other hand, tend to be found in warmer, shallower bodies of water where rocks and vegetation provide ample coverage from overhead sun and predators. Think of that local pond or reservoir with fallen trees, rock crevices, cattails, overhanging willows, cottonwoods, lily pads, etc. Generally speaking, if you see the structure above the water or just below the surface, then it's more likely largemouth territory. And if it's too deep to tell or too cold to wait and find out, then you might be in smallmouth country. As water temperatures slowly begin their spring and summer climb, it's worth noting that the window of opportunity to find these big fish is only open for a few weeks, sometimes less depending on the rate at which the temperatures rise and how, let's just say, efficient the bass are at spawning, if you catch my drift. Here's Martin Koenig, Fish and Game Sportfish Program Coordinator.
Around 60 degrees, bass are full-on spawning. At that point, they're already thinking about digging their nests and depositing their eggs, which means bass are very catchable in that mid-50 degree range.
Bodies of water warm up differently based on their size and location. Shallower water warms quicker than deeper water. That kiddie pool in your backyard is going to be a lot warmer, a lot quicker than water flowing out of the base of Arrow Rock Dam, for instance. So monitoring the ongoing temperatures of whichever body of water you plan on fishing is key. Keep a thermometer handy inside your tackle box when you go out. In many bass fisheries in the southern part of the state, more on destinations later, that clock is already counting down. Step number 2 is check the weather. Spring fishing can be hit and miss, but it's usually best when the weather is stable. Bass will come into shallow waters as weather warms and will stay there if conditions remain good. Spring cold fronts can interrupt this migration when bass often turn back to deeper water. Anglers will have better luck fishing on bright, sunny days when the fish are more active. Cloudy or rainy days often push bass back down to their wintering levels, making the bass less predictable. Now, how do you decide if you're going to fish from the bank or from the boat? Normally, the only way to target those big, deep water bass during the year is by boat, and some form of technology that monitors water depth. Shore anglers are usually pretty limited to how deep they can target fish, since casting line out from dry land only gets you so far. During much of the year, those larger bass, especially smallmouth, are down deep or hanging on offshore structures, making them tough for shore anglers to get to. However, as the temperatures rise and we get deeper into April, the playing field sort of levels out for anglers of both varieties. Pre-spawn bass will be ascending from the deeper pockets of a lake or reservoir onto shallow, gravelly flats. This is when shore anglers have a better chance to reach them with a jig or bait, and fancy sonar ain't necessary.
It may just be 3 weeks out of the year, but the bigger smallmouth are going to be the ones ready to spawn. Those mature 15 to 19 inchers are seeking out that sandier, gravelly shallows to carve out little divots in the bottom and deposit their eggs in those spots.
Males will usually show up first to prep the nests in hopes of attracting a female. Once the work of digging the nests is done, females will show up, if the male's handiwork is up to snuff, and deposit their eggs. The females don't stick around much longer after that, though. The males, on the other hand, will hang around to guard the nests and ward off any predators such as bluegill or perch, which might see the eggs or newly hatched bass fry as an easy meal. Males also work to keep the eggs oxygenated by fanning them.
But seeking out the spawning beds is just an indicator. Finding those transition zones in the water level somewhere between the warm shallows and spots just below is where you want to be targeting them.
To see how this works, let's go to Oxbow Reservoir. Oxbow Reservoir, the 581-acre stretch of water along the lower Snake River, is a perfect example of how water temperature determines where bass are in their life cycle. Oxbow's long and shallow water corridor, essentially a bloated section of the Snake River, doesn't provide many opportunities for deep sections of water that a larger lake might have. Water flowing into Oxbow from the base of Brownlee Dam is especially cold, roughly 55 degrees during the spring. With colder water coming in, bass might be pre-spawn in the upper end of the reservoir. Midway down, where the water temperatures have warmed to around 60 degrees, bass will have already moved on to the heart of the spawn, hugging those shallows closer to the bank to dig nests and lay eggs. Near the lower end of the reservoir, the bass may have finished spawning and are already back in the deeper portions of the reservoir. And the cool thing, all of these behaviors and stages in the spawn can be witnessed on a single day. Where your fishing spot falls on the temperature scale will determine what part of the bass life cycle is happening there. As seen in this Oxbow Reservoir example, there are many factors that drive water temperatures to fluctuate. It goes without saying that lakes at higher elevations take longer to warm up. For example, the higher elevation Upper Snake River flowing into American Falls Reservoir is going to take a lot longer to reach those optimal 55 to 65 degree water temperatures than, say, CJ Strike Reservoir, I guess, down in the southwest corner of the state, despite being on the same river system. Anglers should be thinking about this when considering where to target big bass. Expect the bite to be earlier where the water's warm soonest. Okay, so right now you're probably wondering, just tell me where to go. There are dozens of fisheries all across the state that hold decent populations of largemouth bass and smallmouth bass, and in a few cases actually have both. Depending on the region, consistent weather patterns and a preference on which type of bass you're going for, here is a list of some of the best bass fishing spots around Idaho. For largemouth bass, look for shallower, warmer waters. Think 5 to 10 feet of water with flooded habitat, tree stumps, cover, and vegetation. This list includes Lake Lowell, Crane Falls Reservoir, Cove Arm Reservoir, Glendale Reservoir, Ben Ross Reservoir, Ponderay River, Weston Reservoir, Man Lake, Mud Lake, Man Creek Reservoir, and several community ponds. As for smallmouth bass, smallmouth habitat is harder to recognize and might be down deep below the surface. In the spring, look for rocky shorelines with boulders, dams, dikes, cliffs, etc. Anything that breaks the river current is a good bet. So think Brownlee Reservoir, Cascade Reservoir, Anderson Ranch Reservoir, Dworshak Reservoir, Milner Reservoir, Lake Ponderay, American Falls Reservoir, Lake Walcott, Foster Reservoir, Salmon Falls Creek Reservoir, and the Lower Snake River. And if you're looking to target both smallmouth and largemouth, there are diverse bodies of water that have both deep, cooler pools and warm shallows along the bank, which can give anglers a good chance for targeting both. This includes CJ Strike Reservoir, Coeur d'Alene Lake, and Coeur d'Alene Chain Lakes. Every day of fishing is a little different and every fish is a little different, but there are common traits that will help you catch bass during spring. They're still a little sluggish, so they aren't typically going to chase a fast retrieved lure or bait. That also means you might not get the savage strike for which bass are famous. It might feel as subtle as dragging your lure across a blade of grass or a gentle, steady pull. Since they're spawning or getting ready to spawn, they're likely going to be close to the bottom, so that's where you want to fish. Best of luck. Next, here's a cool study happening in the Southwest region. Our biologists have found that ground-based cameras show promise for measuring mule deer fawn ratios in certain spots of Idaho. For the past 3 years, Fish and Game staff in Southwest Idaho have been evaluating the effectiveness of remote cameras in Unit 32 to estimate mule deer herd composition, which is a key measure that helps wildlife managers understand recruitment and overall mule deer herd condition over time. The results so far have been promising. In each year of the project, these ground-based cameras in the Weiser-McCall mule deer population produced fawn ratios nearly identical to those from traditional aerial surveys, suggesting remote cameras could offer Fish and Game a reliable, lower-risk tool for monitoring certain deer populations. Fish and Game conducts aerial surveys each December across southern Idaho to assess post-hunting season mule deer herd composition. These are relatively short surveys where we aim to count a sample of at least 1,000 deer in each data analysis unit, or DAU. A DAU is comprised of multiple hunting units and represents the seasonal range for an interbreeding mule deer population. One of the metrics we look at is the fawn to doe ratio, which is recorded as the number of fawns per 100 does. In the Weiser-McCall DAU, we observed a fawn ratio of 60 fawns to 100 does last December in 2025, which is near the long-term average of 59 fawns to 100 does since 2011. Aerial surveys are expensive. They're time-consuming, weather-dependent, involve risk to staff, and helicopter availability is low during that time of year. So because of this, Fish and Game is constantly evaluating other potentially safer or more efficient ways to obtain deer composition data. Over the past decade, wildlife agencies have increasingly used remote cameras to monitor wildlife populations. Biologists in the southeast and southwest regions have used cameras to assess fawn and calf ratios respectively along migration routes to winter range. We've been able to use radio collar data to identify several mule deer migration routes along north-south ridgelines on the east side of Unit 32. During the last 3 years, our staff have been evaluating sites to place cameras along these routes to sample part of the Weiser-McCall deer population. Our biologists also located a narrow area on one of the north-south ridgelines where deer moved through quickly and didn't appear to stop and mill around. This was important to reduce the chance that we would get multiple photographs of the same deer. In 2023, we placed 10 cameras on 10 game trails in this narrow area. Cameras were deployed in October and retrieved by late December to ensure that we caught the majority of the migration. SD cards were processed back at the office where staff examined every photo to count and classify deer that passed by the camera. We used those counts to get our fawn to doe ratio. The first year was a learning experience. There were multiple cameras knocked down or sideways by rutting bulls and bucks. People pulled 2 cameras from their post, opened them, and stole their SD cards. Several game trails received very little deer traffic and therefore few deer photos. In spite of all this, we did manage to get 609 photos of deer and calculated a fawn to doe ratio of 61 to 100, which was very similar to the aerial estimate that year of 62 to 100. We learned from the first year and in 2024, set cameras only at the 3 best spots identified in 2023. We built gabions around the camera posts and placed cameras in security boxes to fix the issues we had with tampering and to protect the cameras from animal rubbing. Again, the fawn to doe ratio from cameras was remarkably similar to that obtained from the helicopter in 2024. This effort was repeated in 2025 using the same camera setup and same locations. Once more, the fawn to doe ratio for the cameras was nearly identical to what was observed on the aerial survey, which was 59 to 100 versus 60 to 100. This method shows real promise for collecting fawn to doe ratios in certain areas. That said, it won't ever fully replace the need to fly surveys. For instance, this level of detail in radio collar data isn't available for all deer populations in the state, which makes identifying specific, narrow migration routes problematic. Additionally, not all wintering populations have migration routes that lend themselves to being photographed by only a few cameras. Nevertheless, it shows promise as a viable method in specific populations. And our staff will continue to investigate and improve methods to manage wildlife. That's all I got on that story. Hit the link, though, to read Regional Communication Manager Brian Pearson's article on our website. That's all I got for top stories. Let's hit the rapid fire bulletin. Fish and Game has taken a look at e-tagging validation for turkeys and wildlife management area planted pheasants, initially with potential to expand programming to cranes, sage grouse, and swans. The rulemaking would allow for e-tagging and create provisions around the application for the e-tagging validation methodology. So, Idaho Fish and Game is holding a public meeting in person and virtually to discuss the proposed rules on Wednesday, April 15th. The meeting will be held in person at Fish and Game headquarters, but folks can also tune in via Zoom. Construction efforts on 3 wildlife underpasses on US 30 are set to begin near Montpelier this month. This grant-funded project under the direction of Idaho Transportation Department will include the installation of 2 concrete box culverts, 1 bridge, and 6 road miles of 8-foot-tall fencing between highway mileposts 442 and 448. This short section of highway intersects with a topographic bottleneck known as Rocky Point that funnels migratory mule deer along a regionally important mule deer migration route. Data collected by Fish and Game and ITD shows that of the deer killed on just one 20-mile stretch of US 30, about 70% are reported at Rocky Point. Once completed in the fall of 2026, this underpass project will improve driver safety while protecting migrating deer and other wildlife. Manulife Investment Management recently removed nearly 8,600 acres of land from the large tracts program in Unit 5 near Amida due to persistent violations and damage to property. The acreage has been divided into 2 parcels that will be leased for exclusive access. Managing public use of these parcels has become increasingly challenging for Manulife. Changes in land management like this are a reminder that all large tracts parcels are private lands and access can change at any time. If you want to see a map of the affected lands, hit the link in the show notes and read TJ Ross's press release and see maps of a new closure. That's it for this week's stories. It's time for our question of the week. This week's question comes from listener Lewis S. Lewis wants to know, is it legal to shoot from or across a road that is under a seasonal closure to motorized vehicles? Thanks for writing in, Lewis. That is a great question. Huge shout out to my colleagues in the Enforcement Bureau, Justin Williams, Joey Ishida, Craig Mickelson, and Canine Officer Blue, who were able to get to the bottom of this question. The answer is no, you cannot shoot from or across a public maintained road under a seasonal closure to motorized vehicles. Thanks again for sending in this question. Hope this helps. That's all the news we have for this week. Thanks for putting an ear to Idaho Fish and Game's Hook and Bulletin. If there's something on your mind or if you got a question related to fish and game matters, feel free to drop us a line at podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Again, that's podcast@idfg.idaho.gov. Thanks for listening, folks. Catch you next week.